Thank you for being with us. Carolyn Long is attacking you of being too extreme. What do you say about that?
Well, I have fought hard to protect our wild salmon runs, and I'm fighting hard to make sure we have funding for an I-5 bridge replacement. If I find an area where the president's going to help this district, I'll work alongside him. And if there's an issue where he's going to hurt us, like drilling off the coast, I'll stand up to him. So if that's extreme, I'm going to go to bat every day of the week for the folks here. I think that's a big difference between my opponent and myself. I'm a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is exactly 25 Republicans and 25 Democrats. You have to be asked to join. And I was asked to join in large part because I have really worked so hard to make solving problems for those of us in our daily lives who live here my number one priority. So I feel like those are probably fairly unfounded accusations, but she's got to throw something.
According to 538, when President Trump was elected that congressional term, you voted with him 91.6% of the time. This last Congress, it went down to 69% of the time. Only 7 members of the GOP Congress vote with him less often. Why is that?
I have not seen that because I don't tend to watch the different gauges, but I will tell you, like I said, if he's going to vote for something or sign something or support something that benefits us, I'm going to be there with him. For example, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when we wrote that and he signed it into law, it ushered in unprecedented economic growth here in Southwest Washington. Record low unemployment, wages rising among the lowest income and the hourly workers. Like it was a boon to our economy. I was happy to work to bring that prosperity here. He's tried to do things like sell off the Bonneville Power Administration or drill off the coast, off the Pacific coast to find oil. Those aren't things that help us, and those aren't things that are in line with our way of thinking here regionally, and I've had to stand up to him. So, the chips fall where they may when it comes to people who are going to rank it, but I think first and foremost, I'm dedicated to the voices in this community and what they want me to stand up for.
Let's talk about those tax cuts. I think it was $2 trillion that they led to. Some people say the boom in the economy was financed on a credit card, that you'd have to pay the debt eventually. You voted for that. What do you say?
Well, I'd say that letting the average family of 4 here in Southwest Washington, keep $2,300 more of their own money a year isn't credit card spending. That's returning their money to them. I can't help it if that's the arcane way that the CBO will score things, but letting a family keep their own money versus having the government spend it is the right way to go every time, like every time, twice on Sunday. And the other thing is because of the prosperity ushered in because of those tax cuts for small businesses, for the average family, the average single mother saw a 70% drop in her taxes. I mean, this impacted everyone. That ushered in record growth in our economy, and it brought in hundreds of millions of more tax dollars to pay down the debt and the deficit. So by having more people pay taxes, and when I mentioned record low unemployment, that's among almost every category. Individuals with disabilities, women, people of color. I mean, it was so specific down to Hispanic males without a college education had record high or record low unemployment. So I mean, it really rose all boats here. And when you have that many more people paying taxes, you're going to reap back the money that you've allowed people to keep. So I guess for my part, this is a big difference between my opponent and I. She said she hates that entire bill and she would vote to undo it, which means she would vote to raise taxes on the average family here by $2,300, on the average small business by 20% a year. And right now, in the middle of a pandemic, it's the worst time to raise taxes.
So your ads attribute that statement to that radio station, KXRW. I've talked to the head of that radio station, and they said that that's dishonest. I listened to the entire thing, and I never heard her say that. What she says is she wants to get rid of the Trump tax cuts, but that she wants to keep them for working class families and make them permanent. She also says she wants to incentivize taxes for businesses and not raise them. So it seems like you're being dishonest there.
Well, let me read to you her words and you can decide. On January 24th, she told KXRW Unfiltered Radio, so it's a left-leaning radio station, when they asked about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, She said, quote, "So I hate the entire bill. I'd like to throw it all out." In August 8th, when she talked to the Columbian editorial board, this was in the last election, they asked her about it, and she said, quote, "I would not have voted for that bill. If I could repeal that bill, I would." In August 11th of that same year, she told KGW Straight Talk, they asked her, it was a longer question about the tax cuts, you know, if you'd have been in Congress, would you have voted for or against it? And she said, "Oh, I would have voted against it." So
right, and then she goes on. Then she goes on to say she would make the tax cuts for working class families permanent.
Well, so I just read you 3 of her quotes.
Right, but the first quote you read, you stopped before she goes on to say she would make the tax cuts for working class families permanent.
She said, "I hate the entire bill. I'd like to throw it all out."
And then
I don't know if entire and all mean different things to you, but to me.
And the next line she says, "I would make the tax cuts for working class families permanent."
Well, so here's the thing, and she says, I'm reading you her quote. "I hate the entire bill. I'd like to throw the whole thing out." I think what she realizes now is that means it's going to raise taxes on businesses and families. She hasn't said anything about the opportunity zones. So I don't know what they are in Oregon, but I'll tell you, in Southwest Washington, almost every county has what's called an opportunity zone as a direct result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So the Vancouver waterfront redevelopment, the Longview Beach Street revitalization project. The reason that's so successful is it's going to draw $100 million of private investment because of the tax incentive. So because they say, "Hey, come invest in this area that needs revitalization. We'll give you a tax incentive to do it if you leave your money in this community." That's going to bring about 200 jobs. And like I said, $111 million of private money into Longview. She wants to throw that out. There are small businesses who are part of that, who want to earn money from that, who want to be on that main street. She wants to overturn that. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, "I'm going to give people their money back and I'm going to take it out on them." Like you can't have both. And I think right now she's trying to have it both ways. My job is to paint the contrast and say, look, I'm not trying to raise taxes on small businesses or families. I don't think that the government spends that money better than they do, especially right now. And you know, if it means, you know, right now for her, you know, of course she doesn't want people to know she'd raise taxes. But the reality is, if you undo the bill, you're going to raise people's taxes, period. You can't just pick one sector of the, I mean, I guess you can try, but that wouldn't, she talks about the $1 trillion of that bill. Well, the reason it's so successful is because it gave everybody okay, so there were wealthy people who didn't get a tax cut, but it gave almost every average family some of their money back. That's the difference. You can't have it both ways.
You regurgitated, I don't know if I've ever seen this before, you regurgitated an ad from 2 years ago, the first time I saw it come back.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear that last piece.
You regurgitated an ad from 2 years ago. I think the first time I saw it come back, I did a double take at the TV saying, I don't think I've ever seen this before, where someone regurgitates an ad from 2 years prior. How long do you think it's fair to run that ad again?
First of all, I don't know if I'd use the same word, regurgitate. Here's the reality. If it was true 2 years ago and it cost her not to win the election, then it's probably still something that people here find important. The issue is, are we going to oppose Oregon's unfair tolling scheme on Southwest Washington commuters? Oregon's moving forward to put a toll on I-5 and 205. Would cost the average commuter here $1,600 out of their pocket a year. She said she believes that it's unnecessary to fight it, and that's her word. She told Marvin Case with CBTV that. And then she also said that she thinks that the bureaucrats are going to fix it. Well, you know, if past is prelude, we actually need a voice here who's going to stand up to things that are unfair, that are going to pick our pocket. And that's a big difference between my opponent and I. I'm going to fight for working families here. I'm going to fight for those folks who have to, who are going to have to pay those tolls. It's still an issue. Oregon's still moving forward with this issue. So again, if it's still important to people here, it's still something that people need to know about.
How would you pay for the non-federal portion of the bridge?
Well, so you're conflating the two issues. So if Oregon's unfair tolling scheme has nothing to do with fixing the I-5 bridge, which is why it's so important that we fight it now. Because if they use that money, which they've declared their intent to, they'll use it on projects elsewhere in the state. meaning Oregon won't even have a way to pay for its part of the I-5 bridge replacement. So there's the Oregon's tolling scheme, which is number one, which is what I'm fighting, which is what the quotes on that ad are talking about. The second piece is, how are both Oregon and Washington going to pay for the non-federal portion of the bridge? So you can't conflate the two.
But your people in your ad are standing in front of the interstate bridge.
Well, because Oregon's gonna toll there, and they're gonna use that money elsewhere in the state, which then begs the question, how is Oregon gonna use that money for its share of the I-5 bridge replacement? It jeopardizes not only the I-5 bridge replacement, but I would say it jeopardizes working families who have to cross the bridge. You know, in this last debate that my opponent and I did, she said, oh, you can't confuse congestion pricing with tolling. Well, my question to her is, do you support congestion pricing? Because what that means is the family who maybe can't afford a starter home in Clark County anymore, certainly not in Portland, maybe they work in Portland, but they live up in Kelso, they have to show up at 8 a.m. when their boss says shows up. They're not the owner or the CEO. They don't get to choose the variable time to come into work. Those are the families who are going to get hit the hardest with this congestion pricing scheme that Oregon's moving forward with. It's not the Lexus Lane CEOs, it's the working family who doesn't have the luxury of living close enough to their work. And this is a very salient issue. You call it regurgitation. I would say this is the difference, and this is the problem. My opponent wants to make this race about Donald Trump and national issues. Part of the reason the people in this district continue to send me to Congress is because I'm laser focused on the things that are important in their daily lives, like paying tolls on a commute, like keeping more of their own tax dollars in their back pocket, like having a job here in Clark County, Cowlitz, Lewis counties. I mean, you're essentially paying me the difference between my opponent and I.
How would you pay for an interstate bridge?
Well, as a federal representative, I fought to put really hundreds of millions of dollars into two different federal accounts. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, which doesn't necessarily set policy, but it helps direct federal spending. So there is federal money there for when Oregon and Washington agree, and that's not going to be total agreement. I don't think anybody expects that. But when there's a genuine consensus between the two, and they can say, here's our agreement, here's what we want, the federal money is there. And I think the federal government needs to pay the lion's share of this bridge.
Right, but how do you pay for the funding gap?
What funding gap?
Well, if I dig into my brain, the archives, I believe that the federal government was going to pay for half or 2/3 of the bridge, which left $2 billion of money had to come from the state or local governments to pay for that.
You're talking about the failed Columbia River Crossing Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the one that we're talking about building. Unless you know something I don't. The reason that one failed is they were going to build it too low, and they were also going to put light rail on, with something Clark County didn't want. So if that's the proposal you're talking about, I would say right now that Clark County doesn't support that bridge, and it's not something I'm going to be trying to get. I'm not going to be forcing their hand at. So you're talking about a gap, but right now there's no proposal on the table where there's a gap. I mean, you can't even draw a gap right now because there's no price tag on there. Again, unless you know something I don't.
I don't know. You're in Congress. Your ads have these people standing in front of the interstate bridge. So I would think you have a plan for the interstate bridge.
Well, so I don't think you understand the difference. So there's the I-5 bridge that needs to be replaced.
Yes.
Oregon, not trying to replace the I-5 bridge right now, actually it was 2 years ago in their legislature, passed a bill to toll at I-5 and 205 simply to gain the revenue, simply to use that money for pet projects all over Oregon. I'm fighting that. That's what the ad is talking about. That's the $1,600.
So why are they in front of the I-5 bridge?
Because they're going to toll at the state line. So at I-5 and at 205, so if you're an unlucky stiff who has to work in Oregon, commute, when you cross that bridge, in Clark County, the numbers vary. I couldn't tell you exactly what it is right now, but it's been up to 70% of people commute into Oregon. So the Oregon legislature, knowing that they were going to be able to charge a toll on Southwest Washington commuters, and those commuters would have no political recourse. Like, they couldn't vote anybody out of office because they have no voice. It's essentially taxation without representation. And you better believe I'm going to fight that every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
In 2017, you said you weren't voting for President Trump. And you said, I didn't want to tell my daughter that I'm okay with behavior like this because I think when it comes to leadership, character matters. What changed?
Well, I certainly believe that integrity is important, which is how I've operated in this job, which is why honesty and integrity is something that, like I said, if I had to stand up to the president, I've done it. I stood up to him when he asked me to vote for a healthcare replacement deal that I didn't think was going to leave people better off, which was what the promise was. We're going to leave you better off. And I told him that. He said, I need you to vote for this. And I said, Mr. President, you know, folks in Pacific County, who are mostly Democrats, supported you in this last election because they believed that you were going to pass a bill that was going to leave them better off with regard to health care. And he said, yes, yes. And I said, well, this bill doesn't do that, which is why I can't vote for it. And honestly, that's how I've operated. I think in this election, for me, it's very clear. You know, we've just had a horrific pandemic that has cost us lives, it's cost us jobs, and right now people are clinging to their livelihoods. I don't want to support a president who's going to raise taxes. Joe Biden has talked about it in several areas, and according to CBO and to others, his economic plan could cost us, and this was pre-COVID, almost 500,000 jobs. Right now, as our small businesses on Main Street are fighting to survive, I think raising taxes on them and making it harder for them to operate is the wrong approach. And it's pretty simple for me. I want to see our economy moving again. And, you know, this district voted for Donald Trump. In that last election, I didn't. Here's a pretty big difference between my opponent and myself. I don't endorse everything he does. I don't like everything he does. You know, I had to call on him. I've called on him multiple times to be clear about something or to reverse something. But here's the difference. You know, I've worked in this job both with a Democrat administration and a Republican administration, and under both, I've been successful in passing legislation that has benefited people here. This is an area where I feel like my opponent, you know, AOC gets a lot of national attention. She gets a lot of press. She raises a lot of money. She has passed not one bit of legislation to benefit the people in her district. Like, no major piece. Her people are hurting. They've been hurting because of COVID. There's an economic issue. Yet she hasn't been successful in moving the ball down the field, so to speak. And this is something I think my opponent would follow suit on. She doesn't like Donald Trump. And I'm not going to blame her for that. That's her opinion. But there's a chance that she would have to work with him to solve problems for people here. And I don't think she'd be able to. When I think about the sea lion legislation that I worked with Kurt Schrader, when we started on that legislation to protect the wild salmon runs, no one was supporting us. Yet when we finally got that past the House floor, every single of Oregon, Washington supported that bill. Republicans, really extreme Republicans, really extreme Democrats. And I think that's something people in this district require. They want the ability, they want their member of Congress to be able to work across party lines, whether or not they agree with whoever's on the other side.
What is your health care plan? I mean, we keep hearing from the Trump administration, we're going to come up with a health care plan, and there hasn't been one.
Well, I can't speak for the Trump administration, but I can tell you I've had, again, in this Congress where Nancy Pelosi is the speaker and my party isn't, I've been successful in passing legislation that would extend health coverage for moms and infants. Right now, under Medicaid, or I should have said the law of the land, you know, if you're a poor mom and you qualify for health coverage, you can get that health coverage till 60 days after you've had a baby. But what we know is, because I've been fighting to end or reduce America's maternal mortality, we know that if you're going to have a complication as a result of birth, it's going to be in that first year. About 70% of those happen in that first year of life. I've supported bipartisan legislation that came out of the House this year that would extend that coverage to that first year of life. I think so that's part of the safety nets. I believe we have to shore up the safety nets. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons I didn't support Donald Trump's healthcare replacement plan. I also believe we have to allow people to purchase health insurance across state lines. I think we need to support association health plans. Those are small business health plans. In fact, that was one of the areas I had to take on this administration, and ultimately got them to support what I was doing. But Washington State has over 500,000 people, you know, union members, teachers, you know, people who are part of small businesses or associations that get their health coverage through those plans. He had a rule that was going to upend those, and I was able to protect them. I also believe we need to make sure that we're protecting Medicare and Social Security. That's another big piece. You know, Medicare, so there's Medicare, there's Medicaid, and there's the VA piece, and then there's the kind of the individual market, or the market where people get it from their employer. there's not one, in my view, there's not one single plan that hits all those. You need to strengthen each piece. And I've been putting those up and knocking them down nonstop. Another piece where I think is critical is the cost of prescription medications. You know, I've crossed party lines and I voted for legislation that would slash prescription drug prices and would put a cap on seniors out-of-pocket costs. And ironically, Big Pharma ran attack ads against me for that. Or that could have also been because I have a legislation that would allow people in Washington state to purchase their prescriptions from Canada. You know, it would be the stuff that's regulated in Canada, you know, the same insulin drug that's available up there. It's about twice the price or 2/3 the price here. Why not allow them to have the same safe medication that's regulated? But right now there's kind of some access, I would say, antitrust problems there. And I voted, and I have legislation that would open that up for folks in the state. So again, there isn't one magic bullet when it comes to healthcare, but it's something I'm committed to doing because I believe in it. I believe people need access to it.
I feel like you were talking about pre-existing conditions when you were talking to the Columbian. What's your stance on pre-existing conditions?
Well, I have a 7-year-old who has a kidney transplant. And I get my health insurance through the ACA. So I'm very vested in protecting people with pre-existing conditions, which is why I have co-sponsored legislation that would protect people with pre-existing conditions, irrespective of what happens with the ACA. You know, I believe we have to do better than the ACA. I have a kid who's got, significant health needs. I see the flaws of the ACA quite often. I think we have to do better, but I also don't want to pull the rug out from under anybody. And this is my commitment. I wouldn't do it to my own child. I'm not going to do it to your family.
According to 538, we're almost out of time here. According to 538, you were the 10th most absent in votes compared to all representatives in 2019. You missed 26.5% of all votes. Is that a problem?
That's got to be averaging in the time when my daughter was in the hospital. There's no way it was during, it wasn't, in fact, even in this last 7 months, I flew back for votes and hearings through the COVID pandemic. So the number you're looking at most assuredly includes my daughter's NICU hospitalizations.
2019, it says.
Well, we're going to have to look at that. It also could have been 2019 was my 3rd daughter's birth. So there was a month where I took maternity, but I came back at, I think, 4.5 to 5 weeks. I think it was 4.5 weeks I started voting on the floor. So 2019, I did give birth. I took 4 weeks where I did not come to the House floor. But right after that, I brought her with, I think she was 4 or 5 weeks old. I brought her onto the House floor for votes. So I think you're probably picking on people who choose. I mean, there aren't a lot of moms who have babies in Congress. I'm the second only to have 3. And it's hard, but I do believe that it's critical that we have young women who are having babies who are making these decisions, because we represent a lot of the American public.
We're almost out of time here. This window is going to close in about 4 minutes. What are we missing? What points do you want to make?
Well, I definitely think that the economy, keeping people both safe physically and protecting and growing our economy out of this pandemic should be the number one focus for someone in this district. And then once we kind of stop the free fall of the economy, we need someone who can empower small businesses really to lead us out of this pandemic and into recovery, which is why I'm really pleased to be supported. I'm the only candidate in this race to be endorsed by the NFIB, which is the nation's largest association of independent and small businesses. I've also been voted as the most effective lawmaker in Washington state out of the senators and the House members, and that was by the Center for Effective Lawmaking, which is a compilation of a couple major universities. And it's not because I just talk about being bipartisan, it's because it's in my actions. It's because I've passed major legislation that I've either had opposing presidents sign, or I've gotten it out of a house where my party wasn't in the majority. And that demonstrates my willingness to be effective and to solve problems for people here. I'm a Republican. I don't make any bones about it. I'm not switching parties. But I've never approached this job with an ideological axe to grind. I've been willing to work with those folks who are going to benefit the folks here, and to the degree that the proposals are hurtful for us I've demonstrated a willingness to stand up to anybody. So I think those are the reasons why folks here have continued to support me. I humbly ask for their support again as we move into this next election.
What's your polling telling you?
Well, the last thing I saw publicly was the primary, which was good. It was solid, but it's certainly not, I'm not going to take, I mean, that was a month ago, and I'm not going to take anything for granted. My observation is if you do this job well, elections do tend to take care of themselves.
I really appreciate your time. It's always great speaking with you.
Absolutely.
And good luck to you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.